road. Today I'm going to talk to a group of students about React hooks, and try to do a little bit of introduction to that topic. Let me just see if we can get this this thing off the ground. I was running into some technical issues, but now hopefully I am good to go. Who knows? Right, so where am I? I don't want to do that. I'm mirroring both my screens now. Use a separate display. Right, here we are. Here is the separate display. So let's see if we can get this thing up. No, we cannot get that up. Okay, thank you very much. So we want to mirror this one. There we go. All right. Yes, so we're going to talk about that. We're just going to have to go into oh, I'm blocking the title of the talk. So let's see if we can get our now you can hear me, people, right?
Now we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Right, okay, we're live on the stream as well. So let me just share my screen with you guys so you can see what I am about to do. But you know how it is. Join the Twitch stream, always good. Helps my statistics up. No, I'm kidding. Right, so I have my presentation. Let me just go through the checklist. I have my presentation, I have you, I have the stream, and I have my cup of coffee in an unbranded cup today. I usually try to drink my coffee from my Craft Academy cups because I don't know, but I am wearing my Codefather t-shirt. I actually designed this once all by my lonesome. So I took the Godfather logo and I vectorized it and I did that. But Luke, thank you. You are my most loyal follower. I appreciate that a lot. I can't even express how much I appreciate that.
I just turned up and said this emoji.
Yes. And we have David there saying, hey, awesome. At least 2 loyal followers. And Christopher looks like, what the fuck is he talking about?
I'm there.
Oh, yes. And Kim is there. Well, you have to say something if you're there. Anyway, hooks in React, people. Hooks in React. Let's get after it. Let's see if we can get any smarter, if it's even possible, right? Right? Battle Manly. Yay. That's Lucas, actually. I love it. Yeah. All right. So I'm blocking the subtitle here. So I'm actually going to move myself, and I'm talking about the stream. So I'm going to move myself to the corner there, and see if we can keep it there. Otherwise, I'm just going to turn off the camera. Anyway, well, say goodbye to classes. Bye-bye classes. Okay.
Bye-bye classes.
You have some scar tissue to show for that, because you guys were doing the mid-course exam here at the Craft Academy Bootcamp, you know, and so you know that it is not exactly the same thing. And we have a new follower. Thank you for doing that. Right. So we usually try to have some quotes for on our presentations, and I didn't pick this one. So Kendrick Lamar. Who is that? Yeah, apparently you guys know.
It's a rapper.
It's a rapper.
Yeah.
There you go. Now it all makes sense. The quote actually makes sense. I'm only as good as my last word, my last hook, my last bridge. Okay. Well, that's from music. Okay. So that's the quote we had chosen for hooks. I feel cool now. All right. So a little bit of what I will be talking about today. A little bit of background why we are where we are in ReactJS. We're going to talk a little bit about hooks are in general, in programming, and also what hooks provides for us in ReactJS, and also about the benefits of the whole thing, right? Because you might wonder, why would we even care? Why would they give up a winning team on a winning team? There was one way of dealing with components and state in React when React came about, and then after a while they changed their minds, I guess. Hydrate, Krister. That's good. It's gonna keep you from yawning. You know it's contagious. Right?
Nope.
It's not helping. I drink like 10 liters of water every day, and I run to the fucking bathroom 3 times an hour.
Perhaps that's the problem. Perhaps you're too exhausted for running to the bathroom. I don't know.
Yeah, drink too much water, maybe.
Could be something like that. All right, so let's see if we can dive after this. I'm glad that we're sharing this with everybody else as well. I'm gonna actually turn off the chat visibility during this presentation. It's enough to have me in the corner. I recently moved to a new room, and the lighting sucks big time. I don't know why I look like a fucking zombie on Twitch, but I do. That's life. Background to hooks. It was released. It was part of React 16.8. So React goes through a very, very fast development cycles, and they are using semantic versioning in their own way, one would say, and they are in release 16 over the last, I don't know how long React's been around, for like 6-7 years, perhaps 5 years and something. Compare that to Ruby on Rails that you guys are also familiar with, and I assume our viewers are too. They are in release 6 after 12 years, I guess, right? So it's every team has their own the way to version their software. And it was an update to make React stay modern and popular. And I don't really know what that means. This is taken from a source close to the React core team or some blog post. I don't think that being popular is, well, I guess it's important, but I would say relevant or allow developers to be productive is an interesting thing. But about staying modern, that kind of confuses me actually, because what we're abandoning are classes, right? Class components. And to me, personally, this is my opinion only, the class notation in JavaScript is actually quite modern, and it hasn't been around for that long, and introducing it and then abandoning it and claiming that it's not modern, they lost me there somewhere, basically. It's I'm not really on board with that. And they claim that classes are a bit confusing in JavaScript, and then I think that this could relate to the to this, which is always confusing in JavaScript, which is the scope of things. We can make up our own mind later on whether it is so confusing or not. And another reason was that the components built in as class components could grow, I would say, right? Who wrote this? I don't know. I didn't write this. Very large from dealing with all the lifecycle events and also local state. And I don't really see that either, to be honest, because it depends on the programmer. If you allow your components to grow, then they grow. If you're kind of if you extract things and reuse, keep your code dry and so on, then they don't have to necessarily grow. But hey, who am I, right? I'm just a simple guy trying to write a little bit of code. But this is at least the reasons that they listed in their official documentation. This is, of course, up for debate whether it's relevant or not. But here we have hooks. So what is a hook in general? So in programming, we often talk about hooks as a mechanism or a place that provides an interface to some sort of functionality. It's packaged code that allows a programmer to insert customized programming. So it's a very open kind of API to some sort of a functionality. Now, I know that you guys are doing Ruby on Rails development as well on APIs on the backend side, and we have we use hooks in Rails as well. We use before hooks, after hooks, in terms of when we deal with active record models and so on. I haven't exposed you to that yet, but there are things like hooks as well. Now, why am I mentioning this? This is a React talk, but I think it's important to know that words sometimes have two meanings. This is a direct quote from A Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin. Check it out. Sometimes words have two meanings, and in this case, hooks can mean one thing in React and another thing in Rails, and yet another thing in another programming language or framework. So just be careful with that. Right. So hooks allows us to tap into some predefined functionality and modify it one way or another. So what hooks provides in ReactJS? Well, they give us a possibility to give our functional components. You know, there's a big difference between functional components and class components. Our functional components can now have all the functionality we have in our class components, and just live with it, you know, and reap the benefits of that. So we can have kind of life cycle events, or at least we can simulate them, and they are very useful. And we can have local state, which is also very useful, and then some. Okay, and there is one hook for all lifecycle events, which is the use effect thing, and you can modify that to mimic different sort of behavior, and have things happen under different conditions and premises, basically. And you can also build your own hooks. So this API is fairly extendable, and that is really good. So you can, if you want to keep your code really dry, you can extract a lot of functionality from your components into your customized hooks, and you know, just raise the level of abstraction in that, and that could be very, very useful to keep your code as minimal as possible, and only focus on the business logic. Now, if we take a look at some code, because that's what we came here for. So on one side we have a class component, on the other side we have a functional component, and both are React components. So both of them, it doesn't come across here, but both of them import React. Okay, and in the, I think it's actually unfortunate that we missed that on this class component snippet, because on the top of that file we need import React and then comma and curlies, and then we also import the component itself, right, from the React library. And then we have a class definition, hello world, and that hello world component inherits its behavior from the React component, which is also really important to remember, that we work with inheritance here. And then we have a constructor that in this case is simplified, because we do not have to use the constructor function, and this goes for React, this goes for JavaScript as well. Unless you are passing in any arguments, you don't need to spell out constructor. You can just set the attributes directly, and in this the values to the properties directly. And in this case we have one property, and that is state. State is an object, right, and the object contains one key value pair called planet, and that is the key, and the value is Earth. Pretty straightforward. We set Earth as the value of the planet in that particular component state whenever it is being rendered on the screen. All right, and then we have a render function, which is something that we have in class components. Again, we don't have them in functional components. So the render function just taps into the state object and extracts the value from Earth and stores it in an Earth variable or constant, actually in this case. And this is using the destruct notation. And then finally we do the one last thing, and that is to return some user interface. And that is a div. It says hello, and we inject a little bit of JavaScript, and what we inject here is planet, and there is of course a bug in this code. You see that probably, right? Because it shouldn't say planet, it should say Earth in this case. Or Earth shouldn't be called Earth, it should be called planet. Right? So there's a bug on that constant line there. Lucas, please, can you re-render this for me one way or another?
Can I? I don't know.
Yes. So we can have a better example on the slide there. But you know, I wish I could say, but again, I don't know that this bug was introduced to keep you awake. But I wouldn't bet on it. Actually, I think we made a mistake here. So that is pretty much the class component that will hold state and display the Hello Earth on the screen. Straightforward.
Yep.
Is there any questions? Is there anything apart from the obvious bug that is weird with this thing? Local state. Okay. So in functional components, it was not possible to hold state before we introduced hooks. So the second example is an example that holds state locally in that component using the useState hook. So we start from the top. We import React, and we also import the useState module. We don't have to do it, just so you understand. You can just import React, because when you do that, that imports the entire library. But then if you want to use state, then you have to say react.useState. The reason why we're using this destruct method is for our own convenience. We don't have to do it. And just to clarify, if we go back to the class component really fast, if we don't say import React, curly's component from React, we can say hello, like class hello world extends, and then react.component. That is also possible. But it is more of a best practice to actually import those modules because, you know, it leads to fewer lines of code at the end, and fewer, not lines of code, but at least characters in your code. Okay, let's go back to the functional component again. We are declaring a constant, and we're calling that constant hello world. And that hello world constant will hold a function. You know, its value will not be a string or any other primitive, it will be a function. And in this case, it's we are using the arrow function notation, which is totally okay in this case. And on the next line, you know, and that opens with the curly brackets, and we have a constant, and then we have a return statement, right? Now, what is different now using hooks is that we have this constant called planet, and then another one called setPlanet, and that is, you know, inheriting or pulling the functionality from the useState hook. And so if we want to set Earth as the default value of planet, we just pass that in as an argument to the useState function, and that will be enough for us. Now, what is good with this thing, and that's the curly brackets, right? We have the name of the constant, which will be planet and not Earth, as the bug introduced in the last example. But then, and that will be the getter. You understand? You remember I spoke to you guys at some point about setter and getters of attributes. So a getter is a read function. It will, you know, give you the value, and the setPlanet is a setter. It will assign the value. Now, in this example, we're not using the setter in any way, but in principle, we can use that setter to modify the value of state. Now, and the last thing that we're doing here is to return a little bit of UI. which is remarkably alike the return statement in the class component. Also, we just say a div hello, and we inject some JavaScript, the value of planet in this case. And both of them are using the export statement, of course. Both these components needs to be exported so they can be used by the application. So we get a setter and a getter, and that's pretty cool. Now, quiz question: how do we modify state if we want to change the planet in the class component? What is the now if you would say like the function that you have to use to change the this value to, let's say, Venus?
It's not a component did update as well.
Nope, that's the
life
cycle.
That's the life cycle one. Yeah.
This set state.
This set state.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a set state function, and then what do you have to pass into that, Seva, as an argument?
You have to pass in the like an object, which will be like planet, and then a string Venus.
Right.
Planet colon Venus.
Right. Key value. So you have to pass in an object.
Key value.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to pass in an object with the key, in this case planet, and the value that you want to modify to. Would you like to do anything else? That's perfectly fine. Right? Good. Now, the interesting thing here is that in a class component, and bear with me on this one, because in a class component, if I would, for some reason, and I'm not saying I should, but if I would like to add something to state that is not there, like there is no key like that, let's say expedition to this planet, right? When I define it, it doesn't create expedition as a key, but let's say I want to create that one way or another. Is it possible to do that in a class component?
Well, you can also do this set state with the different key pair, and it will create it.
Yeah. And now ask yourself this question, Seva: is it possible in the functional component using hooks?
No, you have to do a const and the whole thing before.
Exactly. So you're locked in a different way. Do you understand, right? So and that's actually a good thing, because it creates predictability, right? You can see what sort of data we are using on the get-go and from the top. So that is actually, in my opinion, a good kind of, they don't allow us to be as flexible as we sometimes want. There are actually use cases to creating keys in state on the fly, but I would say they are, they lead to confusion. I try to avoid it myself. Of course, what I'm saying now is highly opinionated, but I'm just stating my own opinion here. In a functional component, you cannot do that. Lucas, go.
Okay, if you have an object that is the value, then you could assign new keys to that object.
Oh yeah.
So in a very scoped way, you could, I guess.
Yeah. No, again, so we're talking React using JavaScript. If we would talk about React using TypeScript, then you have strong typing. Then you can't change a lot of things. For instance, this planet is a primitive. It's a string. Now, in both cases, I can easily change that to hold an object, which could be confusing as hell as well. But definitely. So from that regard, TypeScript is better because it introduces strong typing. If it's a string, you say this is a string, you cannot assign anything else in there, right? So that's one of the big benefits from using TypeScript. But we're not covering that. But typing is important to at least understand. Basically, you always have you set it to a string. It is your responsibility to keep it as a string in JavaScript, whereas in TypeScript, if it's more you share that responsibility with the program. Does that make sense? Yeah. Really? Because it doesn't make sense to me. So. But okay, if it makes sense to you, it makes sense to you. I'm happy. All right. Now, Now let's take a look at the use effect hook. So we just covered use state, very basic basic example. Now let's have a look at use effect. Again, we have a class component, and then we have a functional component. And this time around, we actually had the import statement. Yay! Awesome. So we are importing React and component from React library. We have users list that extends a React component. We have state that has a key called users, and that holds an empty array. And you guys gonna go like, I should have done this in my mid-course exam. Anyway, and then we have a life cycle event called component did mount. These events are not present in functional components. We don't have them, right? And this component calls on a function called fetch users, which is not defined here because this is just an example. But the fetch users function gets that data for you, either from a file or by making a call somewhere or what have you. You know, it could be hard coded. It doesn't matter how that function actually gets you the data. The important thing at this stage is that it, you know, that you can predict what the data would look like, right? And apparently it needs to be an array because you already set that as a data type in the user's key. Does this make sense? That level of abstraction. And it's also a little bit about your way of thinking. Don't worry on how that function gets you the data. Just worry about that it actually does it, you know. Then when it's time to look at that function, then you definitely need to worry about that, but one thing at a time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does? Did you do that yesterday, by the way, just all of you?
No.
No, okay, cool. Just wanted to hear you say that. I want to rub it in a little bit because I want you to feel the pain. You will not do that again. No smiles? No? Okay. I'll be a few smiles. Okay, I get a few. Anyway, so, and again, so in the component did mount, we were fetching the users, which probably updates the state, and then in the render object, in the render function, sorry, we have the destruct again to users, and then we map over it and return a little bit of UI in a list item, store everything in users list, and then in the actual return of the render function, we are saying UL, which is an unnumbered list, and then we inject that users list with holds that holds a bit of user interface. Pretty straightforward, right? That's the way you need to look at code. And just to reiterate one thing that I know you guys know, but I just love to say it, so bear with me. Components are like regular functions with the only difference that they return a little bit of user interface, whereas regular JavaScript functions, they return data. Okay? So you have arguments that you pass into a component if you want, and then you have some user interface that comes out of it on the other end. And in regular functions, you pass in some arguments and you have some data that is being returned. That's the only difference, right? Okay, now let's take a look at the, because the key of this slide is the component did mount on the class side and the use effect on the other. But let's take it from the top anyway. We import React, we import use state. We did that in the previous example already. What's new here is that we are importing the use effect hook, right? Now we have a constant that uses use state, very similar to what we do in the class component. That's the same functionality. We get a setter and a getter for the user data, which is an array. We can see that because we pass in an array to the use state, and we also get the setter, which is set users, right? Then we have this weird thing with the use effect hook, and the problem with the use effect hook is that it is a bit complicated. Okay, and if you feel like I don't get it, that's totally okay. At the beginning, when you start using it, I also didn't get it, and sometimes, to be 100% transparent, I still don't get it, to be honest, right? I do get it if I think about it, but sometimes, you know, when I'm in a hurry, I make mistakes. This way of using the use effect hook that I show you on this particular slide is mimicking the component did mount lifecycle effect. What happens right after the component has been mounted on the screen? Okay, and that is that the use effect takes two arguments. First, what it is supposed to do, that's the function, the callback, and then it takes an array that can, but doesn't necessarily have to, contain data that has or values that has changed during the process or during the life cycle of the or during the not life cycle but during the processing of the component. Now in this case, whenever we are mounting it for the first time, nothing really has changed. So this empty array represents that execute me when you are being born or when you come alive, basically. So this is the first thing that is happening once we have it on screen. Now, what is a bit confusing to me, to be honest, is that, but it's the same thing with the component in mount, that the component actually renders once, then once it has been rendered, it triggers the use effect or the component in mount again, and whatever is supposed to happen happens. And if that in one way or another trigger a re-render in the virtual DOM, then that is actually being executed, right? So now in many cases we are doing things that are necessary for our user interface to have some meaning, which means that the component will be rendered twice. Okay, now I would have preferred to have something in terms do me before you render. You understand? That would feel more logical to me, but that is not what's happening. And I assume, and I've been talking to some people about this, I assume that that's one of the critiques, but I'm not sure, you know, whether it's relevant or not. But instinctively, it feels that I would prefer to execute some code, do some stuff before I actually render the component on the screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't like this has this component about the mount in the class component? Isn't that
Yeah.
what you're talking about?
Yeah, but we don't have that in the functional components.
Okay. And also, like you said, some values are about to change. So it's like some values outside the use effect. So like state or
yeah. State, definitely state. Right. Absolutely. I think we have some examples of that. We'll see. Otherwise, perhaps we can do a little bit of coding. And then, you know, once this fetch users has been executed, and that's a JavaScript function, probably fetch call, or, you know, like an API call using Axios or the fetch API in JavaScript, whatever. That stays the same independently of if it's a class component or a functional component. And in my world, I would say that this needs to be extracted out from this component altogether and performed somewhere else, because it doesn't really fit the profile of being part of a React component at all. That's one. The second thing is that it could be potentially reused or something, you know, by another part of the application. So we should not make those calls directly in the component itself. And again, this is a little bit of pseudocode, so don't take this for granted, because you probably, you know, in real life you would say fetch users, and then do something with whatever you are getting back from them. All right, but anyway, the rest is just cosmetics. You know, we look at the users list, we iterate over the we create a users list, we iterate over the users, we map it, return a little bit of user interface, and then in the main return of the functional component, we just return the unnumbered list. And the only difference here is that, you know, in a class component we have the render function. Here we don't have it. It's the main return of the component. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right. So, and looking at it this way, you can see the similarities and the differences between those two methods. There are actually more things that are similar than differences between class components and functional components using hooks. Are we clear? Awesomeness.
I was sitting and reading about the use effect shit yesterday in the exam.
Yes.
I couldn't understand shit.
No.
Not the best situation.
And I feel sorry for you there, because this is not something that you can, fix on the fly. Like,
Yeah,
oh shit.
but-
You know?
yeah. So I
No,
was like, oh,
no.
how the fuck should I do now? When I was going in and reading about use effects and like, well, what the fuck is this? And
I might be mistaken, but the only person, and I don't want to expose anyone here, but the only person that actually did a very good attempt to use a class component, or who was instinctively thought that this is not right, I shouldn't have this as a functional component, that was Arun, and he refactored that into a class component, and that was the right way to go about this. All of you others did a good attempt.
Kim did it.
Once again,
I think Kim did it to him.
Kim, did
Just
you do that as well?
To give him some credit.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I missed that. So Kim and Arun did the quote unquote right thing. But I'm not saying that you guys didn't do the right thing, because you did you took a different path, and that's perfectly fine. But what I'm saying is that, if you want to pick the low hanging fruit, then if you look at it from that perspective, then Arun and Kim did it okay. The others did it fantastic from another perspective. So good stuff. Anyway. Those two hooks, the use state and use effect, are the ones that you should definitely start with. Nothing else. Don't worry about anything else. Really. There's so much to be said about hooks, creating your own, and so on and so forth. Don't worry about it. Pick one thing, try to master it. No, try to make use of it, and then try to master it, and then move on to other things. Okay? It's the use state and use effect. That's about it. And also, use the use effect in its simplest way, which is by kind of simulating the component did mount lifecycle event and nothing else. Because you see, there are many different use cases for use effect. For instance, what happens when some data is changing? Should I have one or multiple use effects? What happens if I want to do some cleanup when my component is about to be unmounted, and so on? Don't worry about that at all in the beginning. In the beginning, the only thing you want to do is to make sure that you can hold state in your local component when you use functional components, and that you can tap into the rendering flow and the structure of the component when that is actually happening. Does that make sense? All right. Otherwise, you would just confuse the shit out of you, probably. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is this better or not, right? If you stumble upon some developers using class components, should you shit all over them and say, "Hey guys, you're not doing this modern ReactJS thing"? I would say no. I would definitely say don't do that. They are doing the things that they are comfortable with, and that works, right? And I don't see a problem with using class components at all. I don't do it because for me it's easier to use functional components. I feel more at home with being in control of the naming, for instance, the setter and the getters and all of that stuff. I like it. I did enjoy class components with everything that they brought to life, but I think that this was a good change. It was a good thing. But you will be exposed to class components many times if you work on legacy code, if you follow some documentation and all of that stuff. So don't don't forget about class components. Which brings us to this question: why did we learn classes if we don't want to use it anymore, right? You will. The short answer is you will use classes one way or another. But there's another reason for more from a pedagogical perspective, and that is, and perhaps you won't agree with me, but it is actually easier to understand state when you use class components than it is if you use functional components. Now, it's a decision that we made together here at Craft Academy, and I support it still. It was a decision made a few years ago, and we'll revisit this over and over again, and we come up with the same conclusion, that if I would, or Emma or Lucas, introduce you to the hooked way of doing things, only functional components, I think it would be harder for you to understand component state. It is easier to do it using the class notation for the way I look at it. And also, this talk that I'm delivering right now, where I actually compare working with state and in class components versus functional components, clarifies that even more. You achieve the having state, but you do it in two different ways, which in itself is a good learning experience. Do you agree with me on this, people?
Yeah.
Yep.
And also explaining. Go ahead, Christian.
It's good when we get out and get a job and we work with this, and we will see they use classes and shit. It's good to know it.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. That's another reason. Absolutely. And also, one thing that is easier to explain in using the more classical way of doing things in React is the life cycle events. Since we're working with virtual DOM, and the component is actually displaying a bit of user interface, and you want to be able to modify that user interface without having to be very imperative, like you are in JavaScript. Like, if this changes, then you have to do this, and then window reload or whatever, right? You don't have to do any of that in React, because React is declarative. The React is more show me this in the state that you currently in, right? If you think about it, the return statement, both in the class component and in the functional component, only says div hello planet, right? And that doesn't matter how planet came about or if it has changed. It will always display the latest value of the planet variable. And you as a developer never have to worry about it at all, because that is what React does for you. React reacts to changes, right? And there is much to be said about that in very fancy words. I could talk about data bindings, two-way data bindings, all of that stuff, but it doesn't mean shit, right? What is important to understand is the low-hanging fruit, and that is that if your data has changed, then React will display that latest version. In this case, if planet changes in any way, forget about the bug, but if it changes in any way, that will be what the user sees on screen, and that is the beautiful part. In regular React, you built the address book challenge, and you did some other, like the BMI, I think. It is much harder to do that, because you have to tell your program to if this has changed and if this happens, then you have to re-render one way or another. And that is the difference between declarative and imperative programming. And I know that we mentioned this at some point when we talked about React in the beginning. This is definitely something that gets lost in the big myriad of information that we throw at you guys. So I totally understand. That's why I revisit this in this talk as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good stuff. And at the end of the day, this happens here in the class component, it happens in the functional component, and it's the same thing here in the component that actually uses lifecycle events one way or another. The problem is for you that are new at this. I don't know. Perhaps you don't have any problems at all, but for me, it's definitely a problem. And that is to separate that. You know, like how do I get the data, and what should it look like when it's there, displayed on the screen. You understand? And I see it all over and over again. That confusion. If you don't make that separation in your way of thinking, then things will be much harder on you. It's like you have to have a flow that says, okay, I want to get this data. This is the way I'm doing it. Either again, hard coding it, getting it from a file, getting it from a database or an API call or whatever. There are plenty of ways to get hold of data. Then you probably want to process it one way or another. Not always, but sometimes. Perhaps you want to sort some stuff. Perhaps you want to modify it a little bit, or have you use it as conditionals and so on, right? And then you want to display something based on that data, okay? And if you think about it again, it is a little bit about, it's connected to the three layers, about data persistence, the logic, and the presentation. And it also refers a little bit back to the MVC pattern, the model view controller, in one way, but not always, because React is pretty much just a there's just a V in the MVC, but I don't really subscribe to that. But I would say that there's a lot of logic as well. So the V and C, but not the M in the MVC. But it doesn't matter. It's a different discussion. But that separation is important. What do I want my application to look like when I'm done with whatever I'm doing? And in our flow, when we test things, right? When we have the to-do list saying that what we want to achieve, is even better, because we kind of already have a vision of what the user will see on our screen, right? Given certain data is present, and so we can name those elements, those nodes. It should be called display area, or section for this, section for that, and so on. And you can write an acceptance test that if my user goes in and he clicks on this and does that and whatever we are doing, then the picture should be painted in one way, right? And then you can start backwards, like really start from the user's perspective, because you can say that you can describe what the user sees. You can see the outcome from the return statement. That is the user interface that the component should return. And then you work backwards and say, how can I make this happen? How can I get this data? You understand? And so working backwards is it can feel a little unintuitive in the beginning, but it's actually the best way to approach this. If you do it the other way around, if you just focus on the data, then you lose the user's perspective. That's usually when you end up with really shitty UIs and UXs. But you focus too much on the technical part, and then when it comes to actually displaying it, you can't really wrap your head around what is relevant, what is not, and so on, right? That's a bit of a problem. Not always, but it can be. So finally, the benefits of hooks, and I can subscribe to that, to most of the things that are being said here, even though I do have my own opinions about everything else, and which is something that I want you to start to form. You're so far into the game that you can definitely have your own opinions about this. More readable code, yes, I would say yes. It's the functional components are more readable. It's usually less code, not always, but it could be less code than the class components. But more importantly, it is more readable. You can see from top to bottom what sort of data you will be working with and so on, what you're returning and so on. But then again, just because it can be more readable, it doesn't have to be, right? I've said this before, and your ability to write and speak English doesn't make you a fucking Shakespeare, right? You can fuck up things in the functional components as bad as you can do in class components, right? So you can create some real spaghetti code with both notations, which is something that a lot of beginners excel in, you know. So be on the lookout for that. We lose this, no more this in functional component. So remember that, because it's really never use this word in a functional component. It's just not there. Another thing that is really important, and that is that a lot of external libraries and packages, they start to use React hooks. And as I said, you can create your own hooks, which is something that a lot of maintainers of external libraries do. If you look at React Router, they have hooks nowadays called use navigation, use props, use this, use that. Redux, React Redux implementation, use selector, use reducer, and so on, right? So there are plenty of ways to do that. So more and more people in the React world, you know, tapping into using hooks, their own versions of hooks that are relevant for their own benefit or use cases. And finally, the modern way of developing React. Yes, if you are into hype-driven development, then this is relevant. If you are not, then this is not that super relevant. Yes, it is the modern way, but as I said before, you will stumble upon class components as well. However, and let this be heard now, that in our world, we moving forward, and this doesn't go out to Twitch because I'm just talking to my students at the moment, we will not accept you submitting code using class components after today. Okay? So any outstanding work that you are doing, sure, if you have to, but one of your assignments moving forward in the next few days will be to take at least one class component and refactor it to a functional component. Okay? So we will not accept you using class components moving forward in any new development. Are we clear on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It is for your own good, people. Trust me. It's tough love, but it's for your own good.
I think a fifth benefit, in my opinion, is definitely the setters. Do you get that off the bat, so you don't have to create those manually every time. You can just use that, and you can pass it off as props as well. It's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you know, the set users it's declarative. You know, it's very informative. It's a good name, and you know, and so on. You don't have to declare it, like in this case, because we're not using the setter anywhere, and in those examples, we don't necessarily have to even declare that. You can, if you know that you won't be changing that anymore, you don't have to have it, the second argument in that array. You can go without it, but it is for free. It doesn't cost anything in terms of memory or anything like that. So you can set that. Right, 2 minutes left, people. Q&As, quick run through. Kim, did you learn anything from this talk?
Well, yeah, everything is new pretty much for me, this stuff, except for for within this week. So yeah, I need to research like the use data use effect, like read on that, master it as I said before I do anything else, pretty much. So
Right.
yeah.
Make sure to look at those examples and refactor by, you know, learning by doing is the best way to go about. The documentation around these things are really extensive. So if you go too much into research mode, you might end up even more confused than anything else. So this is definitely, and I don't know, Lucas, if you agree with me, but I would say that this is definitely one thing that you have to learn by just doing it. You know, documentation is a bit effed up. Would you agree, Lucas?
There's definitely a lot there, I guess. But the very first page, I guess, I think that's something you state. That's all right. But yeah, then you can. Then there's 10, 20 more pages on all the other hooks as well, and then it starts to get a rabbit hole, become a rabbit hole.
Luke, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I like the functional side of things, mainly because I think I like the fact you could follow the set users to where it's or the users where they're going, instead of like this state, because then you've got to go, okay, which am I looking for? Oh, that one. And then, so I like the fact you can sort of like follow almost like a path of where each one goes and where it's going back and up and down. So I like that. I like the readability of that. So I'm looking forward to using them more.
Cool.
But I understand the need to fully understand the class component as well.
Cool. Did this comparison where having a class component and a functional component side by side, did that work?
Yeah, it definitely shows the similarities. I think when you sort of read them online, you go, oh god, they're completely different, and then see them side by side, you're going, oh, okay, it's actually the same, just a few different words and a bit of different syntax to get the same result.
Good stuff.
So yeah, it was definitely good to see them together.
Good stuff. Thank you. Arun, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very interesting the way you're solving the comparisons between them and explaining. So I think it is like this state, and here using use state and set. I think it will be interesting to learn more by doing practice of it, and to understand it in a better way, because use state and set they here in a here in hooks, it's a little different way to do it. So it will be very interesting to grasp the understanding of the hooks and to use it more. And then I think I'm looking forward to do more practice of it, so can get a grip on it or try to understand it in a better way to use it. So I would like to say, Sas, I will like to do more things on it. That's it.
Awesome.
Take it in.
Awesome. Good stuff. Thank you very much, Arun. Sieva, your thoughts on this?
When I first, so like this use effect is a new stuff for me, but I kind of was more or less familiar with use state, and I instantly liked it more than the state and class component. Also, I like that functional components don't have this render thing, because to me it was always confusing. Should I do something before render or in the render? And it kind of takes it away. So I think it's more straightforward and more readable. I also wanted to ask, I think functional components, they take props the same way as class components, or there is some difference?
It's the same. If you talk about props, it's the same thing. Apart from the props object is no longer bound to this because you don't have this. You call it directly props.
Just props and then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the props doesn't change at all.
Okay.
So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, Christer.
Yeah, it was nice to see them like next to each other, so we can compare them. And I like this new way to do it. And I think it's good to like go back to old projects, maybe try to change them to the functional components instead of the class, and like try to compare them and make a new one in the so you get like more understanding on how it works. So maybe do like you have here on the screen, but do it yourself in your own projects, maybe an old one.
It's the weekend challenge.
That's the weekend challenge.
It is?
It is.
Okay, so that's good.
That's
maybe.
That's good. That's good.
2 in 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I like this this function component. It looks more readable. And it looks like it's less code, but I don't know if it's going to be there. But it looks like it's less code, maybe.
It is. I mean, again, it's all up to you as the developer, right? But probably, yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Christer. David, your thoughts?
Yes, it looks understandable. We discussed yesterday a bit about this, so just need more experience. That's it to work with this, and it will go. It will go good.
Did
It's
it
gonna
become
go
more
good.
clear with this side by
Yeah,
side comparison?
it became much more clear, like side by side. I mean, you just need to put it together, and it's be next to each other, and then you're like, oh, this means that. All right, now I get it. I mean, yeah, it's really understandable.
And
Thank you.
and so thank you very much for that feedback. One thing from me is that, when you look at components and React code or whatever code you're looking at, the fact that the amount of code doesn't make it more complex. I mean, it doesn't mean that oh shit, there's so much thing going. Oh, it must be a fantastic programmer. Actually, sometimes, not always, but sometimes actually the contrary, right? But it's actually harder to write beautiful, readable, well-scoped code than create those massive files with a lot of shit going on. Just because somebody has written 500-600 lines of code doesn't make him a fucking guru. Don't worry. Don't think that. Now, code should be written not line by line, but the skill of reading code is an acquired skill. It takes a lot of practice to read code and to understand, and focus, like pinpointing the interesting, the relevant parts is the key to success. And as Chris has said, and some other of you said, and we already mentioned this, the use state thing, for instance, just that little thing, it makes this code more readable because you get the setter and the getter. You can follow that. Luke was touching upon this as well, right? You can follow the logic in a much better way. Then if you scroll down to the return statement and you see that there are some buttons or input fields or what have you, right, that use set email. If you have an input field and then you have an on change hook there, and you said that on change is using set email hook, you can follow what it's doing, right? Every time this changes, the state is being updated, right? So it's much easier to go along with that and so on. Right. Okay. Lucas, did I miss anything on this one?
Well, not particularly. No, I mean the use effect. I think it was, I guess, a bit brief, but as you said, also kind of complex. So I guess it's up for personal exploration.
Yeah. Exactly. Don't. I don't want to dive into too much use effect because it is complex.
Mm.
And one thing that I can tell you is that if you make that callback asynchronous, it can work. But if you look at the output in in your console, it will warn you about it. It will say that this is not the way you should do it. But this goes for everything. Always look at the output in your console or in your terminal. If it says that you shouldn't do it for one way or another, then you shouldn't do it. Probably you need to revisit that. Okay.
But yeah,
just because it works, it doesn't make it okay.
But I don't think you make the use effect asynchronous. You make the callback synchronous.
The callback asynchronous. Sorry, the callback asynchronous. Right.
But yeah, you have to kind of make a function inside the callback and make that asynchronous.
Yeah. Or again, as we do here, now the fetch users is probably an asynchronous function, but this is pseudocode, right? So you can define the function outside of the use effect. It's actually better because it's more readable, either outside of the use effect inside of the component, or outside in a different file and just import it. So that's actually a better way to do that. And I would try to keep the code inside of the use effect as brief and short as possible. Just do whatever you need to do and get the fuck out of Dodge, right? And have other functions to do the heavy lifting for you. And stay on top of things, in terms of what is happening. Am I getting data? Am I using rendering something? It's all about the details, people. It's all about the details. It's lunchtime, folks. What are you doing here?
Indeed.
All right.
Yeah.
Take it easy. See you at there's a
Thank you,
next
Thomas.
thing later after lunch. Okie dokie.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks. all.
And to my streaming followers, thank you very much for paying attention. This was a lecture that we do for our students here at Craft Academy. I am also running, or I'm involved in a charity that I would love you to explore. That charity is called Agile Ventures, and we will actually deliver small workshops and courses like the one that you just observed in the context of Agile Ventures. So if you're interested about learning more about coding, simple stuff, advanced stuff, or what have you, then definitely check out Agile Ventures. You can sign up to the charity, create an account, join our Slack, and get cracking on collaborative social coding. That does it for me today. I see you next time. What I usually say: stay safe, stay healthy, and wash your hands and be kind to each other. Thank you very much. So long.